you're done? Okay, Senator Rand, thank you. Senator Keneally.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to SBS for being here this evening. I'd like to begin with an article published on the SBS The Feed blog on the 23rd of April 2018 called Anzac Day Politics Are Holding Back Australia's Recognition of the Armenian Genocide, or I think that's what it was called in the blog post. I think the headline was Every Anzac Day Australia Commemorates War While Ignoring a Genocide That Killed Millions. Was that piece taken down? Because I can't seem to find it anymore.
Senator, to be honest, I'm not sure what you're referring to, so
it's an article by Alex McKinnon.
If you can I have those dates again, and we'll.
Sure, and I've got here a printout from the SBS blog website.
Right.
It was posted on the 23rd of April 2018 by Alex McKinnon. It was called Every Anzac Day Australia Commemorates a War While Ignoring a Genocide That Killed Millions.
I'm not across that article, Senator, so I'm very happy to take that on notice and look into it for you. Okay. It's first I've heard of it.
Well, it appears that it has been taken down. It's been republished on junkie.com. If you could take on notice, did the SBS receive any complaints regarding this piece? Were there any factual errors in the piece? Was the piece deemed to have been offensive or racially vilifying any particular group?
Yeah,
we could take those on notice.
I will. Very happy to, because if we had received complaints, I think I would have known about that article, but because I do see a lot of the complaints with our SBS Ombudsman, but that one's not surfaced to my attention, so I would be surprised if we had. So I'll take it on notice and come back to you.
Thank you. Does the SBS have a style guide that advises staff on how to refer to sensitive topics and issues?
Absolutely. We do have protocols around some key issues. As you can appreciate, SBS does work very hard to not only be impartial and quite balanced in all our reporting, but particularly where there are sensitive issues around world conflicts, current wars, hot zones around the world, but also with historical issues. We ensure that we're, as much as we can, that we are sensitive to our audiences and the communities in which we serve. Now, often, as you can appreciate, with all the things that have gone on in history and the hotspots that are currently in place, some of our Australian communities, our migrant communities, are going to differ on some of these issues. We need to take that in consideration, and we do that. So we make sure that where there are contentious issues, we have protocols in place around how we refer to different things, how we might cover them, to make sure that we're as sensitive and impartial and balanced as we can be.
I think in the last estimates you answered some questions from then Senator Ludlam regarding the style guide as it relates to the term Armenian genocide, and reflected that it was difficult for the SBS to refer to that historical event as a genocide whilst the Australian government does not formally recognise that as a genocide. Is your style guide often directed or influenced by government policy?
No, it's not influenced by government policy, but it's one of the considerations that we would take in place. Now, as you'd be well aware, Senator, most governments around the world do not refer to it as a genocide. The United Nations does not refer to it as a genocide, and the Australian government, and actually indeed successive governments, both Labor and Liberal, have not referred to it as a genocide. So in making our determinations, we would look at all of those things together with how other major media outlets around the world, from the BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, none of them would refer to it as a genocide, but would put both positions forward, stating that many refer to it as a genocide, or that the Armenians refer to it as a genocide, and that Turkey denies that it was a genocide. And that's what we do, is we put both sides to our audiences. We don't try and tell our audiences what to think. We put both sides of the argument forward in a balanced way, and we let our audiences make their own conclusions on things like that, particularly where there are sensitivities. But as I say, the fact that the government's position is not to call it a genocide is just one of many, many factors that we would take into consideration when making determinations around protocols, around very sensitive things like that, that are internationally recognised as controversial issues.
So your style guide then would be different but in how you would differentiate between the Armenian genocide and how you would refer, for example, to the Holocaust or the Nanking massacre or the Rwandan genocide?
Well, they're all very, very different. I don't think you can compare any of those things, Senator. They all need to be looked at individually, looked at the facts, looked at how others are treating it, what government positions are, whatever facts that we can get to determine what is the best way to cover that. I mean, the Holocaust is a very different thing where it's not like Germany has denied the Holocaust. What we're saying is Turkey does not call it a genocide, they call it a mass killing. It was part of war, or the atrocities of war. The Holocaust is a very different thing. There is no, other than a small handful of people who would be Holocaust deniers, but by and large, the world community, the United Nations, the German government all agree that the Holocaust is what the Holocaust was. But I think it's a very different situation when you've got two communities or nations and governments that differ on historical events.
So during last year's budget estimates, the SBS said their approach to reporting on the Armenian genocide was justified because it's a matter of contention that historians over the world dispute. Have you seen a letter that you received from the International Association of Genocide Scholars, co-signed by 43 of Australia's leading experts on the Holocaust, genocide and human rights, which condemned that view that you've taken, that this is a matter of contention amongst historians?
Yes, I have, Senator. I have seen that, and I have seen that it's been signed by 43 scholars and historians, and I can assure you that I could probably find another 80 scholars and historians that would deny that it was called a genocide. So these things are things that SBS balances and is challenged by every day of the week. And as I say, what we need to do is to be fair and impartial on these things and put both sides to our audiences to say that many call this a genocide, but Turkey denies, and that is what our protocol is. That is a factual statement. There's nothing wrong with that statement, but it's not for us to determine a 100-year-old conflict.
I note you said that what others do is of relevance in this space. I note that the ABC, which is the other public broadcaster, seems to take quite a different position. On the 25th of April 2016, they talked about Anzacs in Armenia and described it as a genocide. On the 4th of April in 2016, they described it on Overnights with Trevor Chappell as a genocide. Sunday Nights with John Cleary describes it as a genocide. Do you ever have recourse to consider the ABC style guide when considering some of these issues?
Of course, Senator, and we have had conversations with the ABC. And please, it might be a question better for the ABC, but my understanding in our discussions with the ABC is that they actually don't have a position or a protocol or a style guide around it, and the journalists, some journalists refer to it as genocide and some don't, is my understanding, but it's probably best a question for Mr Sullivan when he's here later, if he's here later, but they don't have a position on it, and they use both terms. Some networks around the world will use the words Armenian genocide in inverted commas, which I think is probably even worse. So, you know, there are different ways of approaching it, and I think the SBS way of approaching it by saying that many call it a genocide and that Turkey denies is a factual statement. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Thank you. I have one last question. Recently, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian gave a speech at the Sydney Institute, and in there she told in quite moving terms. I was fortunate enough to be present about her family's history. She is the granddaughter of Armenian Genocide survivors. The SBS does have a news story online from the 3rd of May regarding that speech. And what is odd to me, and perhaps someone could explain this, is that on the website it's got Gladys Berejiklian tells the story of her family history as immigrants, and then underneath has a photo, and then underneath says New South Wales Premier will open up tonight in her speech in Sydney Institute about her family's survival from the Armenian Genocide. So the phrase is actually used on your website there. Yeah. But then there's no story, there's no video, and there's no audio. It's simply blank.
There's no video, or
there's nothing. Yet if you click on the Arabic translation up the top, there is a story, which I have used. I have tried to get translated. It does appear.
So you must be on the Arabic page?
No, I'm on the English page.
Right.
There is a little button up the top where if you click, you can get an Arabic translation. So in the English page, there's nothing.
If that language click is there, you are on a language website. So
right. So if you're an English reader looking for news of Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier of New South Wales' speech to the Sydney Institute about her family's survival of the Armenian Genocide, you can't read the story if you want to read it in English?
Please allow me to take that story on notice and find out where that was posted. Again, I'm not aware of, I don't recall seeing that story myself. Obviously, we publish a lot of things, so you wouldn't expect me to. So allow me to take that on notice and see where and how it was published and why there's no story under there. That might simply be a technical error. I couldn't tell you.
I'm sure many readers who don't read in Arabic would like to know about the premiers.
Yeah.
And this is an example of where SBS has used the term genocide without actually. It seems to me, even in my Arabic translation that I got done into English, there's no.
But if we're
further acknowledgement.
If we're quoting somebody that is, say, in a speech like that, and we're taking a quote, we would then obviously take that quote as given. So if the Premier was referring to it as an Armenian genocide,
which she does,
which we would have then reported that.
Because she's the head of a state that has actually acknowledged the Armenian genocide.
That's right. So New South Wales is one of only 2 states in Australia, South Australia being the other state. So we are aware of that. So allow me, that's obviously a speech by, our largest state Premier giving a speech like that would be on our website. So it might have some sort of technical error of why that story is not there given the photo and the headline. So allow me to find out.
Okay,